I love that sound because it brings back so many beautiful memories for me.
You're hearing all these wood wheels going around the bank track. This was the most terrific sound you want to hear. It expels the name, roller derby.
It was a rhythm and a sound like you could not imagine.
From Kezar Pavilion, in the heart of Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, California.
The Sunday games were skated here, and this is where most of the TV coverage went across the United States. When I was 9 years old, I walked in through those doors, saw the track out there, walked down those steps and went in the seats and watched that game. It was great.
The sound of roller derby was unique, a signature of speed, contact, and force like no other. A roar, no, a thunder, a rolling thunder. Chicago, 1935, the cold shoulder of the Great Depression. There's shantytowns, breadlines, and countless broken lives. Unemployment is approaching a staggering 25%. In the Depression, reality shows consisted of the downtrodden paying to see the desperate dance and walk for weeks on end. Those that competed aimed low, staying afoot not for the first prize, but for the hot meals and a cot they could call home. That year, one promoter had a new idea. Why not take the marathon concept and put it on wheels? His name was Leo Seltzer.
Surveys showed that 93% of all American-born youngsters roller skate. And then it went down to 45% for baseball, which we all thought was the national sport. Throwing this challenge to a bunch of cronies, they all said, well, why hasn't roller skating gone ahead? And we all decided that it didn't have an outlet. And then we tried to devise some means of finding out how they could skate.
Legend has it that Leo Seltzer began jotting down notes and came up with the concept of roller derby, which in the beginning was called the Transcontinental Roller Derby. And it was a team of one man and one woman, and they would skate on this marathon race across the United States. And there was this giant map on the arena, the wall of the arena, and fans would come out every night and watch these skaters make their way across the country.
But right from its debut on August 19, 1935 at the Chicago Coliseum, the roller derby started to evolve from a simple race to a full contact sport.
One of the officials came to my father and said, you have to come out and see what's happening on the track. And the people were standing and booing and throwing things. He said, what's going on here? He said, well, some of the teams are getting lapped because some of the skaters are faster, so they are picking up laps on them by going ahead. So they're banded together and they're blocking them back, and that's illegal.
Hey, you can't do that, Jerry, and she gives Jerry a block.
And my father looked, said, but the people like it. He says, so from this point on, if they want to block, they can block.
With elbows flying, the derby stayed the course until 1937, and one fateful night in Coral Gables, when Seltzer met a dapper gent who told a good story.
And my father was introduced to Damon Runyon, who was the most famous sports writer of his time.
And he and Leo Seltzer began to rework roller derby, so it became a much more team sport.
We knew it had to be on a bank track. We tried that out in our building in Chicago, the Coliseum. And of course, the game then was not what it is today. It took about 6 years of improvising and taking and picking the brains of all the sports writers and the editors of the newspapers, and even the ushers and the people in the audience.
They evolved the game into pretty similar to what it ended up being.
Roller derby is skated by two teams of 5 skaters. Points are scored on timed jams by speedy jammers sent out to lap the pack. And 1 point is scored for every player passed on the opposing team. Each team, therefore, could be playing offense and defense at the same time. Men and women skated 8 alternating periods, and non-skating referees called the penalties as best they could. However, the appeal of the game was not the rules, but the girls who were breaking them.
I think there was a certain sort of prurient interest in men coming to see women hit each other, or for that matter, just to see women skate.
Barbara, a mighty pretty gal, so is Betty Clements as far as that goes.
Wow, these women, I mean, look at these women, they could do a sport. Roller derby girls, I wouldn't want to come up against them. Some of them were pretty bad. They could hurt you.
They knew how hard it was and how tough and how much you got hurt. And it was very real, and the women would hit each other right in the breast. The tickets, I never heard that expression anywhere else. I've heard a lot of names for breast. I never heard tickets.
There's a close-up of Jeannie Porter. She's red hot. Look at those flashing eyes.
They say, do you need the girls? Frankly, you certainly do need the girls. The girls, right today, carry most of the weight.
And the skaters who brought in the fans were the aptly named Midge Tuffy Brassoon.
Nice clean block by Tuffy.
And Annis Big Red Jensen.
Annis Jensen right behind to number 38.
Who roughed each other up on a nightly basis.
Murray and Jensen, two of the great pros.
Leo's attraction survived the 40s on cheesecake shots, infield triage, and discount tickets. Things wouldn't have changed had his truly American invention not met up with another, television.
He went into New York and met with the people at the Dumont network at that time.
This is the Dumont Television Network.
And said, you know, I want to bring roller derby to the Armory, 69th Regiment Armory in New York City, and we'd like to televise some games. Well, they were looking for anything at that time.
When we got to New York in 1947, 48, we were one of the first things to go on TV, besides Milton Berle.
And Frank Macedo, and Janowitz jumps in to help out.
There were very few sets in the home. They were mainly in public locations. People would stop in front of an electronics store. They'd have television sets in the window, and you'd go by and they'd be mobbed. Opening night, there were maybe 300 people in the building, and television was there. And they moved all 300 to one area, told the cameraman only to shoot that aspect, and the next night, the lines were so long that the building sold out in advance.
One Saturday morning, I'm sleeping in my bedroom. My parents, we was residing on 81st Street in between Amsterdam and 9th Avenue. My sister yells out, Robert, come in here. And I jumped out of the bed. I come in, I see these guys going around the track, hitting each other, banging each other on the head. I said, oh my God, it just seems like something grabbed me and said, hey, you're right there. I said, am I right? I says, I'm gonna do that.
Two jammers out. Pete Mangone and Bob Woodbury out for the Chiefs.
The Derby was the perfect TV sport. Faster than baseball, easier to follow than football, and it had more action on its track than the Indianapolis 500.
It didn't take long for the skaters to figure out, I may want to make more money, and one way to make more money is to make those people out there notice me. And before long, fights were breaking out all over the track. Women were screaming and pulling at each other's hair, not pre-planned, but simply because they wanted their 15 minutes of fame.
It got really rough, I mean, with the fans even. You know, they would end up maybe throwing things or trying to get you when you came off the track.
There's Annie Calvello on the bench.
And when the going got tough, the toughest girl going was the legendary Ann Calvello.
There's Calvello, number 23, moving in.
Weston trying to get her out of the way. And she just scored a play with their block, and they want to keep it.
She was one of the greatest skaters in the history of the sport. She always made sure that fans came into that arena, that if Ann Calvello was on the track, fans were going to leave fully satisfied.
That's Ann Calvello, number 13, the wild, unpredictable Ann Calvello.
Elbows up, forearm block thrown in, another one thrown back.
Oh, that's past Tucker. Calvello's passed by Nelson.
Trying to pick up a real quick point. It's holding, elbow block, Tucker Bassoon, no score.
Ann Calvello was really a, what they call a showman. And she just, for one thing, if she was on the T-Birds, she had blonde hair with T-Bird stencils all in her hair.
She was sort of Dennis Rodman before Dennis Rodman was Dennis Rodman.
It's just one of those things. I told you, I don't want to be liked.
Annie would say, we got to get the crowd up. You know, the people are sitting on their hands out there. We got to get the crowd up. And she'd go out second half. Let's smack someone and get something going. Get her away from that environment. She was just a very humble, nice person.
Well, you want to know something, Walt? I was sitting in the dressing room the other night, and I just looked at all the girls, and I said to myself, I asked them how old they were. Not one of them were born when I started skating.
I am the oldest one skating, but believe it or not, I'm very proud of it. Because I look at some of the kids, not to knock them or anything, they're like only 18 or 19, and they don't have half the energy I have, because I just love to skate and travel. God wills, I'll be skating for another 23.
Calvello actually skated longer, taking to the bank track professionally in 7 consecutive decades, a feat that is unmatched in sports history. Calvello's appeal played a part in Seltzer's first flush of success on TV. He quickly moved from the Dumont network to ABC, which aired the Derby live in prime time in 13 markets. The 1949 season culminated with a sold-out World Series at the old Madison Square Garden. After it was over, Seltzer told the network he wanted a hiatus.
And they said, no, you're among our highest rated shows. We have a contract with you. You start again next Friday.
But of course, after a while, fans thought, well, why should I spend 50 cents for a ticket to go out and see this roller derby at the arena when I can watch it on TV for free?
What television begat, television killed. It destroyed minor league baseball, for example, which has only recently come back. It destroyed the circus.
So when Leo Seltzer moved roller derby to the West Coast in 1954, he sort of did it with a sad heart because he had seen a sport like reach the heights and then get thrown down again. And he actually thought about ending the sport in the late 50s, and then his son, Jerry Seltzer, took over the sport.
Jerry quickly proved an able heir. Working out of an old warehouse in Oakland that doubled as a training school, he got a local station to broadcast the games of the soon-to-be legendary San Francisco Bay Bombers. He also realized that in order to put roller derby back on the road, he would have to make some changes.
So our people redesigned the tracks, lowered the banks so we could go into any place that could handle a basketball game, and it became our salvation, actually.
The introduction of videotape to television in the early 60s created opportunities for Seltzer to export his second-generation derby outside the Bay Area. Giving away game tapes to local stations across the country in exchange for promotional airtime worked. Big time.
So I called, it was WTBS in Atlanta. And he says, hi, this is Ted Turner. I said, Mr. Turner, I said, well, I know we're going to do great in your town. He said, well, I've seen it, I like it. He said, but I can't pay more than $15, but I'll give you 2 extra spots. I said, okay, you got a deal.
Jerry's greatest asset, however, was not the videotapes, but the highly skilled skaters themselves, many of whom moved west with roller derby, fully equipped with the intense training that Leo Seltzer insisted upon.
During the day, they'll get out and they'll skate for hours.
The main thing they did is something called pacing, which gets you into shape. And pacing is just doing the 5 strides on the bank track. There's 5 steps that you take as you're coming into the turn. Start at left, right, right, and that propels you down the straightaway and into the turn, and you do it again.
Just out of a clear blue sky, you'd be pacing, and somebody, Buddy Atkinson especially, would get out there and throw a chair in front of you. Or
that's how you learned how to jump, because they'd throw chairs at you left and right. You'd be just going along, here comes this chair. And so that's how you would get your reactions.
We never knew we were coming. We used to jump over them. We used to have to learn how to take rails, how to fall, how to get up, skate again. It was very rough.
Janowitz goes out to lead the jam. Now we'll start timing the 90 seconds of the jam. Here's Copeland blocking on Janowitz.
I don't know how many pair of underwears I went through, from falling and sliding and, bruises on your butt, bruises everywhere.
And one of the big things was learning how to fall without putting your hands down.
When you know you're going to fall, throw your skates up and try to land on your behind, because that's where all the padding's at.
We got down to 8:30, 8 o'clock in the morning until about 5:30 in the afternoon. We train very hard. So he says, bend your back, you have to bend your back, and you have to go around that track with your back bent and your legs crouch in a certain style to his slackens.
Woodbury back on the block, lead, put down.
And now is where you begin to separate the pros from the non-pros.
And then once you got into the game, once you got into it, as good as you were, if you were really good, it took you 2 to 3 years to learn how to navigate with pros, and maybe 5 years to get up to the top if you could last that long, and everybody couldn't do it.
I mean, even I think we were in better shape than people that skated hockey or tennis players that do a lot of running.
One market that appreciated great skating was hockey-crazy Canada, and roller derby soon found a new audience and new talent in the Great White North.
Maple Leaf Gardens sold out. The Forum sold out.
In fact, the phones are ringing off the wall up at the roller derby office here in Montreal, and they want to know, when will the training school start?
Larry, having gotten injured, they sent him up to be the trainer.
The Kosciu family came down to the rink, and Francine Kosciu, and she hit the track, and you knew. She was ready to skate pro the day she hit the track.
I looked at that track and I said, oh my gosh, can I do this? It was fun because then you went down the little track and then you went up and you went down. It was like, wow. And he taught me how to put my foot on the track and stuff. And after a few days, it was like, I could do this. I could do this.
Let him go by, then great skating there by Larry. Well, looks like it's going to be a tremendous game.
One, Midwest Pioneer.
Here we go. Claudio Palmer lost back the block.
Francine continues. Here we go. Up high, jump block, and go! Pioneers! And she continues with the forearm. Down to Rand.
The girl could skate, and she had heart, and she had the looks, and everything that goes along with when you're dealing with the public, you know? And didn't speak much English, but she did real good for herself.
Francine, yeah, she's a whipper. She was a twinker, you know, like bada bing, bada boom. She was all over the place. She was a happy-go-lucky girl.
Here comes the Spitfire, the Canadian Spitfire, the wife of Larry Smith, Francine Kosciu. Little chick, about 4'11", about 95 pounds, but she has got spunk on top of spunk. Francine Kosciu continues to move. Follow off the railing. The Canadian Spitfire. Finally, the hands on the hips.
Larry Smith, her husband. Larry was always straight and narrow, but you know what? His personality showed through because Larry was a nice, decent man. He was real. He could skate.
Here's a guy who knows how to make things happen. Out moving is Larry Smith, 360 on the spin. Graceful move. Stevens put down. He's bypassed by Smith. Underneath the goal. And go! Pioneers score. Bob Hart,
That's what made him good. Larry could skate.
Kosciu's greatest thrill was returning to skate in her hometown of Montreal.
The fans were crazy, crazy. Every time I went around the track, they would be yelling, and just, I think this was the best time ever, where I felt like, oh wow, I really do belong here.
Larry and Francine's romance was typical of the insular derby clan. Stars on the track often became starry-eyed for each other.
It happened all in the same year. I got a contract with the Bay Bombers. The road trip was over. We hit back to California. We stopped and got married and came home.
Had a couple of wonderful kids, and the rest is history.
This is professional sport at its best.
Ignored as a sideshow by mainstream sports writers, the results of roller derby's regularly scheduled mayhem were thought to be predetermined.
What is funny, everybody thought, well, the games are fixed. And they weren't fixed.
It wasn't locked in. You never knew. You know, sometimes the girls would be more on their game than the boys would be.
It didn't always work because there's just too many people and too many variables. People would get knocked down, people would slip.
Over the rail.
I've never heard any skater tell me that they knew ahead of time what the scores were going to be or what the outcome in the game was going to be.
When you're going over the rail, you know you're going over the rail. Don't just fall in the first row, head for the fourth row.
You got to give them something fast, something exciting, something believable. Send them home happy.
In other words, put something in it. I mean, you're already committed. And because of stuff like that, Derby kind of got a bad name of being almost like wrestling.
Deuces, a couple of... Oh, brother! And goes to work. First block.
We were told to sell things like that.
Not scripted per se, roller derby did have its own unique brand of choreography.
And my favorite thing to do is go between their legs. And she would just whip me and go between the legs, and oh man, people just love that little play. But yes, we set up all plays.
When you see the whole pack go down and somebody jumps over it, that's a working jam. Okay, the ad-lib ones, it's just whatever comes into your head. You're just boom, boom.
Call them athletes, call them entertainers. Jerry Seltzer's skaters were always selling their game while they were playing.
There was a lot of athletic training involved in it, but there was also a lot of learning how to get the crowds to react to you.
You imagine you saw these skaters out there sometimes fighting, and imagine trying to throw a punch when you're on roller skates. Or somebody like a Mike Gammon who's going 35 miles, 40 miles an hour on the bank track, and just one little shot, or even if a skate broke, I mean, he would break his neck, he would kill himself.
That was another thing. People used to ask about this. Well, how can people get hit like that and it, you know, they walk away from all of that and the blocking? What they forget is you're going in the same direction. The block is not the same as two football players or hockey players going in opposite directions. This is going in the same direction.
It was often said that the women brought the fans into the buildings, but it was the men's job to keep them there.
The most exciting game that I saw, it was 1971. Charlie O'Connell started taking jams. People went out with him, they couldn't stay with him. He would be out there, he'd be double blocking. He hit a guy here, move in here. As he's knocking them down, here comes Gammon off a whip. Boom! Passes those guys and they're on. The crowd was going crazy with this thing. There was so much energy. And people were getting up, and I heard people leaving the building saying, see, I told you it was real.
And no derby skater kept it more real than Mr. Roller Derby himself, the great Charlie O'Connell.
Charlie O'Connell with 1 point. O'Connell moving on Brandon there.
Charlie O'Connell was both the Babe Ruth and the Mickey Mantle of roller derby.
Charlie, a good-looking lad, 6 foot, 185 pounds, 25 years of age, and he's single. Charlie O'Connell, the most valuable skater in the roller derby league this past year.
Jerry Seltzer, who was promoting the sport at the time, saw the appeal of Charlie O'Connell and saw that Charlie O'Connell could really be the dominant force in this sport. And he became that. I mean, Charlie O'Connell became Mr. Roller Derby. He was the most accomplished skater in the history of the sport. There was nobody like him.
Double whip coming up to Charlie O'Connell. He's moving behind now. It's Charlie against the 3 of them. Look at him go. A 3-man jump block.
Charlie is the greatest one that I ever had to go in competition against.
Everybody standing, applauding O'Connell, showing you why he's the all-time great.
One of the reasons that Charlie O'Connell stayed on top so long is because if you fought with Charlie, he was really going to hit you.
There's O'Connell blocking out Frankie Brandon. Frankie Brandon, look at O'Connell with that jump block. Charlie O'Connell, the big gun of the bomber attack.
He might not hit you with everything he had, but you were going to have a real fight with him. And that's why people would come away and say, wow, that looked real. Yeah, you're darn right it was. There were people bleeding and, you know, teeth knocked out and people that were hurt.
Did you get carried away with yourself?
That's about all it was. I got hit in the nose by Bill Grohl, and I probably fractured it, and it got me a little upset, and I decided to cave some heads in.
It's a left hook into Bill Grohl. I think he got away with it. He did. He continues he won't get away with it.
Charlie broke my nose once. I was out of line, and he gave me a elbow in the nose when I was skating for the Bombers.
After the game, you'd see people out, girls. Girls were out by Charlie O'Connell's car.
Big Charlie O'Connell, he has fan clubs all over the United States, and they're dominated by the women folk.
Charlie, Charlie, take me home. And he was going out with Ann Cavello in those days, so that wasn't going to happen.
At the Derby's peak in the early 70s, O'Connell was its highest paid star, earning over $60,000 a year.
Well, this is where it started almost 19, 20 years ago, right here in this very spot. My wish has come true as far as I guess I'm concerned, is making it big in roller derby.
Gammon, O'Connell and Gammon.
If there was such a thing as roller derby royalty, Then its crown prince was dynamite Mike Gammon.
Gammon hard into the rail, and over he goes. They're not watching all the skaters.
That's our job, but Gammon low. Trying to stay with Gammon, spins him into the rail.
You led me on this idea.
Bill Grohl moves and hammers O'Connell. Mike Gammon.
Well, my mother and father were skaters. My first skates were made for me when I was a year and a half. I was doing halftime attractions by the time I was 3. I did warm-ups with the teams. My mother had training school. I worked with the up-and-coming new skaters. By 10, I was actually teaching. By the time I was 15, I went on a team professionally. Worked the rest of my life just about around roller derby.
He was a great skater. He was only very short, not very tall, very speedy and tricky.
Mendes block up. Here comes Hessen. Hessen moves up. Jump block by Gammon. Gammon looking for the right over. They both going to the block.
Bill Grohl after O'Connell. Gammon goes by him for a point.
By the time he got to be 18, 19 years old, he was one of the greatest skaters there was.
I hated to go against him in competition, you know? But I didn't mind. That was my job, and he was my competition, and I was after him. And I wasn't going to sit down for no Mike Gammon.
You'd be skating your tail off, and as you're coming to the pack, he was gone. He'd be 4 strides ahead of you. We couldn't figure out what he was doing. And finally, when we started watching some of the TV games, so you'd watch and see what was he doing differently. And it was just a little stutter step that he was doing where he'd pick up that 3 or 4 strides.
Gammon completed another set of Derby darlings when he married fellow speedster Judy McGuire.
The basic thing of traveling is the main thing. As long as we're together, it seems like it's a lot easier. And like I say, if your wife or your husband is not with you, then it's a lot more difficult.
I loved them all. They were my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my brothers, my sisters.
And they were like a family, and they had to stay close. Because on a roller derby tour, life was sometimes tougher off the track.
You know what, we're just going to get in there in time to take a shower and go to the building, huh?
I know, that's what I was saying. Get in there, put our lunch suits on, and that's it.
And then tomorrow morning, we leave what?
We're leaving 6:30 in the morning.
I know, and then we have a game, too.
If you were on the home team, if you were on the Bombers, you worked the entire season. So you'd work from April through September. Then you were laid off. You essentially went out and got another job, or you went on unemployment until the road trip. And then only so many skaters, the tops, could make it to the road trip. And the road trip went from January until we came back in April to open the season. And it was tough. You'd find a lot of really good skaters could not handle the road. This was a difficult life. You had to love it.
First town where we were playing, which was Denver, and I was assigned a room. I realized I was assigned a room with 2 beds and 3 roommates. And so the rule was the first 2 guys to the bed got the mattresses, the other 2 guys got the box springs.
You'd skate one night, maybe at the Gardens, and the next night you might be in Texas or someplace, who knew? You know, or Chicago. You'd go from New York to Chicago. So you'd leave after the game.
This is worse than that time. Lydia, where were we? Where we just came in, had enough time to go do our laundry, come back, shower, jump in our monkey suit, and go to a game.
Well, we used to travel by car. We used to get 12 cents a mile. And at that time, gas was like 30 cents a gallon. So we used to make money on the gas allowance and buy new cars.
And if you were driving 400 miles, normally it might take you 6 hours. In the snow, it could take you 8, 10 hours. So you were doing that. Plus the skaters had to go do interviews. I mean, you know, all of this stuff was going on, and they didn't get paid a lot of money. Rookies were making $65 a week back then. Less tax, so about $49 clear. They got no food money, they got their transportation, and they had to eat out 3 times. I mean, you did it because you loved it.
Keep in mind, this is 1963. I mean, you could live, but you couldn't eat very well.
One of the great jobs that all the skaters wanted was to be able to put the track together, because some of them, I think, could make more money putting the track together than they could skating. Or certainly, they could make an awful lot of money.
So I asked Jerry about working on the track crews, since I had a background in carpentry. And as a person working on the track, I made $125 a week, so collectively I was doing okay.
But at times, like anything else, it does get very tiring, especially on a road trip and everything. But it's my job, and I'm going to do the best I can, no matter what team I'm on.
The Derby people lived well. They enjoyed themselves. You know, it wasn't just Well, a lot of times they had to move, but when they had a little time, they would enjoy a few adult beverages and they enjoyed their own company.
It's a family. It really is. And you travel for like 6 months out of the year in your cars and you're together all the time.
And as the road turned, so did America. And when Derby headed south, it skated into an arena of a different sort.
It was 1965, and this country was in turmoil. When we went into Alabama and we went into Jackson, Mississippi, we had major problems. Now we had 3 to a room at that time. I roomed with JoJo Stafford and Ronnie Robinson. They wouldn't let us room together. I had to get food sometimes for these players because they were black.
I never knew I was black until I got to certain parts of, the country, and then they would remind you that, you can't come in here kind of thing. And a lot of times on the bus, we couldn't stop at certain places because there were a few of us that were black, so we had to go out of that town and go to another.
The African-American skaters in the Derby were often placed on both teams. They were on the Bombers and they were on the visitors teams. Some of them were heroes, some of them were villains. It was one of the first times actually that they had that kind of status. The Seltzers were ahead of their times in giving black athletes a real opportunity.
I felt as though I was opening doors, as well as my colleague, friend Ronnie Robinson opened the doors for all the blacks. And I felt very proud about it, and I felt wonderful, that it was happening.
Ethnicity and race really didn't have much to do with the Derby.
There was no mistaking the role taken by Gwen Skinny Minnie Miller, a skating superstar on both sides of the board.
And Skinny Minnie skates. Down and block and again. Severson, number 7. There's Skinny Minnie with a big smile on her face.
Gwen, my girl in Canada. She was absolutely insane. What a skater. God, what a performer. I mean, just the way she did things, her excitement.
James, she got by 2. Now she goes off the track. She's going to cut off the jam as she gets through wiggling here. Moving up, look out, she got her arm. Sawinski still going. And now Skinny Minnie Miller finally cuts.
All of a sudden I kept hearing Skinny Minnie, and then they hooked my name on. I'm like, they're talking about me, Skinny Minnie Miller? And then at first I was really upset because, it's skinny has like back then, and it was like, when are you gonna eat kind of like things.
She would make you laugh, she would make you cry, she'd make you stand up and scream.
And in Mexico, they called me huesitos, and then I heard that meant bones, so that was even worse. So I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? But they always respected me.
Skinny Minnie, she is a real fine person, and I know why all the Canadians love her, because she's just lovable and great, a great contender, a great sport, and just a great person.
She came to me one day, this early part of the season. Frankie, we'd get paid, and she'd come over to me and she'd hand me some $40, $50, whatever. She gave me money. She's, Frankie, I want you to hold this. What the hell do you want me to hold this for,
One day, everybody wanted to go to this club, and I think I had like about $5 left. So I went up to Frankie, I said, Frankie, I'm gonna need some of that money.
I says, I don't care what you want. That's for the house in California. And she'd have to go borrow the money from somebody else to pay them. I would crack her. She'd be so mad at me.
So he helped me out. I hated him then, but I love him now.
And Skinny Minnie goes down and over, throws it off. Skinny Minnie now.
Those were the best years of my life. And I was lucky and blessed enough to have been there and played a part of it.
In the late 60s, with the televised Derby syndicated in over 120 markets, Seltzer looked to expand.
Imagine all these skaters that you watched every week on TV coming to your hometown to see you. So it became very much about the national tour, and the tour became bigger and bigger and bigger.
You'd be in Pittsburgh on Saturday night, play the game there, play Madison Square Garden on Sunday, have a day off, play Buffalo on Tuesday, then go up into Canada, and then come back down. And every 2 weeks you had to be back at Madison Square Garden for live TV.
They were like the elephants in a circus, who put up the tent themselves. The elephants did. and then performed in it. That was the roller derby, elephants.
But what was good for the fans was bad for the players. Listen to Seltzer rattle off this grueling tour schedule.
You fans watching this series in the Southwest, here are big games coming up in your area between the Pioneers and the Bombers. Of course, this is a home series for the Bombers. Wednesday, February 28th, the new Marriott Convention Center in Oklahoma City. Thursday, March 1st, Dallas Memorial Auditorium in Dallas, 8 p.m. Friday, March 2nd, Tarrant County Convention Center, 8 p.m. Saturday, March 3rd, San Antonio Convention Center. Monday, March 5th, City Coliseum in Austin. Tuesday, March 6th, Hofheinz Pavilion, University of Houston. Wednesday, March 7th, the Hirsch Memorial Coliseum in Shreveport.
Seltzer's box office receipts, however, were tied to the superstar, who was literally head and shoulders above the rest. The blonde bomber herself, the one and only Joan Weston.
There's Joan Weston. Coliseum. Joanne Tucker. He has energy. Sounds swell. Look out, action with Weston.
If you met Joan Weston, the smile alone would warm your heart. She was just that kind of a person.
She was the best as far as I'm concerned. And what she did for all the young girls that came in, she was just like a mother to us.
She didn't realize how she appeared to people. She was what they call the Golden Amazon. She was very tall. She stood out like a, whoa, like who the heck is that, you know?
The fans loved Joan Weston. I mean, she was this, in many ways, she looked exactly what you thought a roller derby skater was supposed to look like. She was big, she was blonde, and of course being on roller skates made her look even bigger. She a lot of times wore ponytails. She looked sort of like the girl next door, but she was in the roller derby.
Joan Weston is working on the Pioneers. These jammers. Tucker jump. Let's go again. She's at Tucker again. Joan Weston.
She was undoubtedly in the 60s and the 70s, the most popular and famous female skater in the history of the sport.
You'd see her, because I always worked on the track crew, taking the track down. We'd be done with the track, and Joanie would still be out in the alleyway, you know, the rear parking lot, signing autographs. She wouldn't let anyone go home without an autograph.
You love to skate, you like the game, and it's very exciting. And if you really don't like it, you can't stay in it. I feel that I, number one, am very lucky because I'm doing something I enjoy and I'm getting paid for it.
But the road got to her too, and she got to the point where she would come into the games late, her hair wasn't done, she'd be dragging her bag behind her. We're all supposed to be in the building by the time the doors open. These were the things that Jerry was going through as well.
Well, if they give us a couple of days off between now and then, I think we should be in good shape. I mean, this is our 8th straight month, you know.
It's not like living here in the Bay Area where you go home each night. You're now at home on a road trip, even if you're at home. I mean, the Pioneers played Chicago one night, St. Louis the next night. It's 350 miles, so you're staying in hotels, so the cost goes up. And you're housing 2 teams on tour.
Worse, there was no time to develop the fresh legs to replace the aging war horses.
Let's face it, we were all getting older. You know, we were all looking at maybe another 2, 3, 4, 5 years at the most. When we were in New York in Madison Square Gardens, the hockey people would look at our scheduling and say, my God, how do you people do this? I mean, they have a schedule, you know, but nothing compared to the schedules that we had. I mean, it was nothing for us to do a 500-miler overnight or 800 miles overnight and be in another town.
You're paying for all of that television. Fans are not getting the quality of the skating that they had. It's not all the skater's fault. A skater wanted to do it, they weren't trained in the same manner. And the ones that were still doing the best are the ones from the 50s because they got the better training and it was natural for them.
And I think it's also quite possible that you can only go back to a middle-sized city so many times. The 4th time you're in Wichita, you know, well, we've seen it 3 times.
To vent their frustration, the skaters threatened to strike prior to the 1973 season, led by Bob Woodbury.
The reason why certain skaters wasn't going to return with us on that season, 73 season, for the road trip that was coming up because of money reasons. And I learned about it, and I thought it was dreadful that it was happening that way, and that's when I went off the track.
Our labor representative sat down and said, there's a tour that's going to start in 8 weeks. Nothing is going to change from where you are now. You either indicate today you're going, or just indicate you're not going and we'll have to replace you. And it all caved then. They all said, we're going.
Why would you leave not only a meal ticket, but the stardom, the spotlight? I mean, here was a guy who was, you know, working on a roof or a plumber or something, and all of a sudden, he comes to Charlotte, North Carolina, he comes to Knoxville, Tennessee, and people want his autograph.
Drinking their bitter tea, the players went on the road that fall, only to run into an unforeseen body block, the infamous Arab oil embargo of that same year.
There were no problem with the prices, but supply just disappeared. You waited hours at a gas station. People were getting heating oil. Arenas were canceling our dates. And not only that, the dates we have, people didn't want to drive there because it was too hard to get gas. So that winter, we just lost the majority of our schedule.
I knew, having traveled with them, what a caravan it was and how expensive it was.
The skaters changed. They couldn't keep up. The road trips were tearing them down. The union thing had come up. The sponsors were leaving. The economy with no fuel and people losing their jobs and homes.
Seltzer shocked his skaters in mid-season when he sold the Derby to the rival roller game circuit.
It was scary, to be honest with you.
And so the Derby wound down on this, its last official schedule, with what turned out to be its final skate on December 8th at Comac, Long Island.
My whole life was there. I worked for his father. I worked for him. I mean, it was family.
Although many stars took jobs with the new owners, it was generally acknowledged that roller games was a skate in the wrong direction.
To me, it was like being captured by the enemy and having to be cordial about it. And I did take a job. I couldn't last. I didn't like their program, and that doesn't mean that I didn't like some of the people there. I just didn't. It was different. They didn't play the same kind of game. They didn't treat their people, I don't think, as well as Jerry did, and so I left.
We did it for a few games here and there, and I remember after a couple weeks of it, or maybe 3 weeks.
It was not the Derby. It was a show first and the Derby second. We got as far as Winnipeg, which was probably about 10 games after we left Vancouver. And Francine was on the track and had a bunch of mayhem and stuff going on that was just like wrestling. And she skated out this halftime, and she said,
I'm done. I am done. I don't want to do this anymore. This was just it was just not the same.
When Francine and I got home, it really hit us that this was it, that we were done. And I guess I had mentally stopped well before that. As a matter of fact, the last 6 weeks that I skated, I don't think I was sober a day. I just couldn't do it anymore.
The best was said, I think, by George Burns, that vaudeville was wonderful because you could play the same act over and over again. In television, he said, there was no place to be lousy. There was no place to learn your act. And once it had been seen, it was dead. And by and large, that's what happened to the roller derby.
Well, 26 years I spent in the roller derby was the best years of my life.
I mean, I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do something I loved to do.
You know, I had a great time, and I'd do it over again in a minute.
Today, the Derby is back in San Francisco. Inside historic but creaky Kezar, a new promoter is leaning on the Derby's legacy to bring back the Seltzer's bank track game. They're even dusting off the colors of the San Francisco Bay Bombers, coached by former pro skater Jim Fitzpatrick.
You know what? They said roller derby was dead. It's alive, baby. I want to put on something that a family can go to, like it used to be. If Jerry Seltzer can look at it, and even though it's not 1969 all over again, but he can go,
They're trying. But the gap between past glories and present hopes is wide.
They should put cones and chairs out for them, make them stay to the outside. Pick up this one over here. This one's too high. To get out of a beginner's class in 1960, you had to be doing this for an hour.
Yes.
And at a full speed. These poor people can't skate.
Still, today's skaters play the game with plenty of historical perspective.
I feel like I'm a part of history skating out there with the rest of the team, the Bay Bombers.
I don't know if I would have cut it. I would have liked to have thought that I could have. But those skaters back in the day, they trained day in and day out, and roller derby was their life.
It makes sense that the continued existence of Kezar Pavilion would compel some promoter to conjure up the ghosts, to hear the crowds cheering again over the unmistakable sound of wood wheels on a bank track. The sound of excitement, the sound of rolling thunder.
I'm Don Drury, the International Roller Skating League and the hosting Bay Bombers from Kezar Pavilion. Thank you for joining us.